I'm doing all right. I've had a pretty good day. Got good workout in. Um, Last week I was incredibly exhausted all the time and having a lot of issues. And I talked to my trainer, and he said that there's a high probability that I'm overtraining. Which I was like, well, that's a good problem to have, maybe, but um, need to be focusing on my sleep and my nutrition a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and my nutrition is not bad, so it's definitely the sleep. Um,
Yeah.
that he said was getting me. But this week it felt pretty good.
Good.
So, anyhow, I'm starting to get millions of messages now that I'm engaged with something. Had nothing to do
Of
for
course.
hours. Okay, setting it to the side. Um, cool. So, welcome to episode 2 of the uh mental health and martial arts podcast. We don't really have a name for it yet. We should think about that.
We should.
Basically, all that's what I'm calling it at this point still.
Yeah.
I'd like to use a different recording process next time because this one is not the best. The audio I think is okay, but the video is not great. So we can talk about that later. Anyhow, for new people, I did get several comments from people, not actually on the last one, but they direct messaged me about our last one, and they were interested in the topic, and so that's cool. Um, but anyway, what was I going to say? I can't remember.
Did you want to do another quick intro or did you want to just jump right into the
Yes.
topic?
Another quick intro. So, brief intro for people who didn't watch the first episode. This is the Mental Health and Martial Arts podcast where we talk about mental health issues, both from the perspective of a licensed professional counselor, which is Ashley, not myself, and a martial arts instructor, which is myself. And talked about a lot of the benefits of martial arts on mental health and actually how crazy similar a lot of the things that we do as martial arts instructors and as licensed professional counselors actually are. So,
I think another important thing to note is that we both have experience not only being a client with a counselor, but
mhm.
also being students of martial arts.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
So that's something we didn't mention last
That
time.
is true also. Miss Ashley has been a student of martial arts. I have been a client of a therapist, um, but I've definitely done a lot more martial arts than I have been a client of a therapist. And Ashley
And
has
I
for
I
sure
have
been
done a
done
lot
a lot
more.
more therapy than she has been a martial arts student.
Exactly,
So yeah,
exactly. And continue, I mean, continuing both. I think, while we both, I'm a counselor and you're a martial arts instructor, I still go to a counselor for myself, and you
right,
still learn from other martial arts instructors.
for
It's
sure,
both, I think both disciplines, this is another similarity. It's my personal belief that it's an ongoing thing.
for
It's
sure.
not just you work on yourself a little bit and then you're done. This is life.
Absolutely, for sure. Cool. So the topic for today is depression. And I want to kick off the conversation specifically by ironing out a definition for depression. Interested to know what your thoughts are on defining depression, because I have my own thoughts based on my experiences. But I'd like to know uh, your opinion on that. Defining depression. What does depression mean?
Absolutely. So there's obviously the Diagnostic Statistic Manual, the DSM,
Mhm.
which is what we usually use for diagnosing depression, and it covers several different categories. I honestly don't know them all off the top of my head. I'd have to to
Okay.
take a look back on it, but it's generally, you want to look at is there um an impact on the person's like motivation and energy. A
Hmm.
lot of times depression affects how how people are motivated or their energy. A lot of times they feel lethargic,
Hmm.
and struggle with that. You want to look at the thoughts. Are they having negative thoughts, low self-esteem, struggling with insecurities and self-doubt? You want to look at hope. So,
Hmm.
a lot of times, people who are struggling with depression are feeling hopeless or helpless, like things cannot get better or there's nothing they can do about it. Um, let's see what else. We obviously, when looking at depression, want to assess for suicidal ideation. And there's a lot that goes into that, but essentially looking for, are they thinking about taking their own life?
Hmm.
Are they planning to take their own life? Are they actually thinking about ways to do it? And do they intend to do it? A lot of people may have thoughts about suicide, passing fleeting thoughts, doesn't mean that they intend to act on it or that they
Right.
have a plan. So there, and then also the means. Do they have the means to follow through on the plan? Those are things you
Right.
want to. In addition to that, a lot of times with self-harm, or with depression, self-harm will be another piece. Just because someone is self-harming doesn't mean they're suicidal.
Right.
So that's another thing to look at.
So here's an
And self,
interesting thought that I just caught up. I don't want it to drop out of my mind as you go.
sure.
So you can almost triage when assessing somebody for suicidal ideation. You can almost triage it in the same way that in my career in law enforcement we would triage threats. So if somebody is threatening you, do they have the ability, opportunity, jeopardy, and preclusion?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or that's actually more for the use of self-defense against someone, right? So if you use self-defense, um, you have to define whether they actually intend to harm you, right? Do they
Mm-hmm.
have the ability to actually harm you? Um, do they have the opportunity to harm you? Um, and then jeopardy is your life specifically in jeopardy, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the immediate moment, and then have you precluded other options that could consider? So those are the four things that you need uh, uh, for a self-defense argument for a justifiable homicide. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a really similar type of triage that you're looking at with suicidal ideation is
Absolutely.
do they have the ability? Do they have the opportunity? Is their life actually in jeopardy? Like it, you know,
Are they actually going to follow through on it? And then
right, right,
also, we look at the resiliency factors too and the protective factors. Do they have
right,
support? Do they have family watching them? Do they
right.
have, you know, tools and
Those would
coping
be
skills?
something similar to like the preclusionary details, right? Are there other factors that might be causing them to maybe say that they're thinking about suicide rather than maybe it's not actually what they're thinking about, but they're um what's the word I'm looking for? They're saying that because they don't know how to say the thing that they're actually thinking about.
Right,
Right.
right. That's what people will listen to
Right, right, right.
sometimes, right? And it's kind of similar with self-harm, and self-harm can be assessed in much a similar way, but it can mean a lot of different things. So usually when we talk about self-harm, a lot of people's first thought is cutting. But there's a lot of ways to self-harm. And that can include substance abuse. That can be a form of self-harm, or
Or thrill-seeking behavior.
thrill-seeking behaviors can be, I kind of look at eating disorders as kind of along the similar line. They're all obviously have nuances
Right.
that are different, but when I'm kind of assessing for lethality and that kind of thing, I view them similarly, if that
Mm.
makes sense.
Yeah.
So, so and then again, but again, not all people with depression have self-harm or suicidal ideation.
Right,
So
right.
there's a little bit of a spectrum
So
of
real
how
quick,
severe it can be.
I'm gonna run through. I'm on mayoclinic.org right now,
Hmm.
so I'm just gonna run through a bunch of the symptoms that they have here and
Sure.
stop me if you hear something interesting that you want to add to. So feelings of sadness, tearfulness, emptiness, or hopelessness, angry outbursts, irritability or frustration, even over small things, loss of interest or pleasure in most or all normal activities such as sex, hobbies or sports, sleep disturbances, including insomnia or sleeping too much, tiredness and lack of energy. So even small tasks take extra effort. I think that's an important one that I want to talk about later. Reduced appetite, weight loss, or increased cravings for food and weight gain. Both could potentially be symptoms. Anxiety, agitation, or restlessness. Slowed thinking, speaking, or body movements. One of the things that they have in here that I thought was interesting that it says suicidal thinking um, or feelings, especially in older men. And there's like no description around why they said it that way. Do you have any
Mhm.
insights as to like the differences between the way that men and women experience depression maybe at different stages in their life?
Um, I know that research shows that men tend to choose more lethal means of suicide than women. And some of the research has shown that women may experience more frequent attempts, or at least some of that can be a little bit skewed because a lot of times women tend to report more than
Hmm.
men do. So it might not be that women attempt more. It might just be that women admit that they attempt more.
Yeah, yeah.
But they usually don't choose as lethal means. So men, the most recent research that I've seen is that men tend to complete suicide more frequently than women. As far as age, I know that definitely older um, uh, people in general, elderly, are at higher risk.
Hmm.
Um, Teenagers are at
Right.
higher risk of attempts. Um, there's a lot of really good info on the research on the CDC website and also on I want to say what website I was looking at. Either SAMHSA or NAMI. Both of those organizations put out a lot of good info on mental health statistics.
Copy.
Yeah, so
Cool.
there's a
So,
lot of different like
mhm,
groups of people that are at higher risk.
right.
I don't know specifically like older men. I don't know what's behind that statistic, but that would be
Hmm.
interesting to look into.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting stuff. So,
One thing I was gonna add to when it was talking about like the loss of pleasure or loss of interest, that's
yeah.
another big thing. And this term anhedonia is that like inability to feel pleasure.
Hmm.
That is very frequent with substance abuse too. And we could get into like a whole nother thing
Right,
about
right.
that, but it happens a lot with depression, is that just this feeling of like I can't feel happy even when I'm doing things I used to love.
Right, right, right. Well, it's incredibly difficult to have a conversation about depression without because it's so commonly coexisting with. I really don't want to like dive into like anxiety and trauma and
Right.
and
But
substance
it does
abuse and all those things, but
coexist
I
with
mean
a
it
lot.
yeah, yeah. A lot of those things tend to go hand in hand. So
Hmm.
but yeah, we'll definitely have episodes on each of those things. I want to try to remain a little bit focused. As long as we're
Hmm.
talking about how they relate to depression, I'm cool
Right.
with going into it, um but yeah, so that's interesting. So I think we have a fairly uh, well defined definition. So next step, um, I'm thinking we've kind of already talked about, I guess, a little bit of, I mean, how you can identify, but I want to go into maybe a more, is there a specific set of procedures that you might do to identify depression in someone, or organized structure for that, or something of that nature? I know we talked about it a little bit already, but
Hmm.
can you bullet point it out or something?
Sure, yeah. So, when coming to a counselor, usually you're going to go through an intake process, and during that intake process, there's specific questions to usually look through what the symptoms are. And from there, once you've kind of determined that it's depression, you create a treatment plan. And everybody's depression is different, right? There's definitely some similarities, but depending on the severity, that may dictate what you do, right? So, as far as if you're going to focus on coping skills, learning how to deal with the negative thoughts or the physical feelings, the emotional feelings, maybe it's processing through those thoughts and feelings. Maybe it's, I look at several different areas. So, like physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, which can also be broken down into relational.
Hmm. Yeah.
And a lot of times, with somebody who is experiencing depression, they're missing a balance in those areas.
Mm.
So maybe they're often not taking care of themselves physically. Maybe they're not letting themselves experience their emotions or processing them in a healthy way. So we would look at that. How can we add in some managing your sleep, managing
Right.
your eating, your exercise, um, building up new interests, new things. Like if
Hmm.
the things that you're doing before aren't giving you pleasure anymore, maybe we need to find some new things to
Right.
spark your interest and help. So there's I look at it very holistically
Hmm.
and try to kind of work on all of those things at once.
So I actually want to cut you off right there.
Yeah.
But so as you're talking about intake, one of the things that I do with new martial arts students is I give them a form and I tell them to write down why are you interested in martial arts? What are you looking for in martial arts
Mhm.
training? One of the overwhelming uh, things that like overwhelmingly common things that they put on that form is uh, I'm unhappy with my life or I'm unhappy with myself and I want to do something to change that. Which is like a bonkers thing to put down on a form with people that you have no, you don't know these people, you've never met them before or anything like that. So really, really interesting. That's a big reason why people seek out the martial arts, and I sort of um, the way that I kind of conceptualize not necessarily depression because I'm not at all qualified to diagnose somebody with depression. But the way that I identify depressive tendencies in people or depressive thinking in people is I take a look at self-image and worldview. So a negative self-image and a negative worldview. And those are generally broken down into a certain number of statements that you can hear people say, things like in the self-image category, I'm no good or I'm not good at anything. Things like I haven't
Having trouble
accomplished
identifying
anything.
their strengths.
Yeah, I haven't really accomplished anything. I didn't graduate from school, or I didn't, whatever. I don't have a great job, or whatever it is that they didn't do that they think they should have done as far as accomplishments go. And then and no one likes me. I don't fit in. My friends kind of suck. Well, and that actually, my friends kind of suck, moves into uh, worldview, and so negative worldview might be
Mhm.
things like the world is no good. People are
Right.
out to get me. People's motivations are generally manipulative. People are trying to get me. The world is built on an infrastructure that's designed for me to fail. Right? That's
Hmm.
a super common one nowadays. um, uh, but yeah, those types of like statements are kind of how I identify somewhat of depressive thinking. Um, and what I generally direct people to is maybe you should start martial arts training. And the reason to, obviously, in very severe cases, you also want to do that. Um, triaging sort of understanding if you're starting to
Hmm.
hear suicidal ideation, then you want to be directing that to mental health professionals.
Hmm.
And we will put in the comments and description where you can go for more information about who you can call for that.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, what is it? What is your interaction with the Semicolon Society again?
So I am on the advisory council
Copy that.
for the
Okay.
Semicolon Society.
So
So yeah.
so yeah, we'll put Semicolon Society info in the description below.
Hmm.
If you're looking for that. But anyway, so
I have a bunch of other resources too that we can put
right,
in.
right, right. Yeah, we
Hmm.
can put in other resources as far as how to identify, is this person someone who is like dangerously in need of mental health therapy? And how can you identify that? And then once you've identified that, maybe who you can contact to potentially get them help. But generally, I go through that thing and I'm thinking, okay, how am I going to deal with an individual who is a not necessarily severely suicidal or severely depressed? It's like 100% in need of mental health therapy, but just somebody who has depressive tendencies, and
Hmm.
they're kind of wallowing in that world. And so the way that I kind of think about it is, well, let's go into each one of those individual statements and we'll do some like discovery, right? When you say you're no good, what do you mean by that? Maybe it's true. You might not be any good, right? Could be, right? Might not be. But one of the challenges of martial arts is to be good. And so it's like, well, if you something like if you put in the work to do good things, um, then maybe you won't think poorly of yourself,
Hmm.
right? But there's a great deal of work that's needs to go into that, and so that's somewhat of a challenge of the martial arts is, well, if you're thinking poorly of yourself, then maybe, the other thing that people say oftentimes is I'm not good at anything. It's like, might be true, right?
Hmm.
So why don't you try learning a skill? And
Right.
the martial arts challenges people to learn a new skill. Um, and try and start very, very small. Um, and then haven't accomplished anything. That's one of the reasons, especially in the development of a new skill, and the accomplishments. One of the reasons that I set up my class for those first new skills and those first accomplishments to come very, very soon. Um,
Hmm.
because that's a thing that I want to talk and I want to hear more about kind of your perspective on. One of the issues with depression is people, even some of the very smallest things, they have a lot of trouble doing.
Right.
Right? Sometimes just getting out of bed is like a monumental
Hmm.
task, right? So, um, so yeah, when you're dealing with someone who is maybe inclined in that direction, what are the types of ways that you can uh, maybe get them some experience with accomplishments?
Hmm. Yeah, so I have two thoughts on what you just said. So
Hmm.
first, I'm thinking about growth mindset versus non-growth mindset or like stagnant mindset.
Right.
Um, where you know, a growth, well, like a stagnant mindset would say, I'm no good at anything and things are just going to happen to me. Either I'm going to be
Right.
talented or I'm not going to be talented. There's nothing I can do about it.
Mhm.
Whereas a growth mindset is going to say, okay, I'm not good at anything. So how can I get good at something? Right? Like
Mhm.
you said, building a skill. And then the other part, one skill, it's from dialectical behavior therapy or DBT. There's
Mhm.
a skill called building mastery. And so the idea is that if we have something that we are constantly like learning and refining, getting better at, mastering, then that helps to promote our self-worth and our
Hmm.
ability to do other things, right? So when you have these little tasks and you can accomplish something and be like, hey, look, this is something that I accomplished, that makes us feel good, right? And then we want to
Right.
do more and more and more. And so I think that's a huge part of, especially the beginning stages of martial arts, is building mastery and realizing you can do something and you can learn and you
Hmm.
can change and you can grow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Huge aspect of martial arts is teaching people to uh, change their mindset. A lot of people, one of the reasons they don't start is because they say, "Oh, I can't do that."
Hmm.
Like, well, none of us could before we started training,
Right.
right? So,
Also,
so
you also
yeah,
couldn't walk when you were a baby.
exactly,
You
right.
had to learn how to
Yeah,
walk, right?
right.
And so I use that analogy of, a little toddler. If a toddler falls down when they're learning to walk, do they just sit there and never try again?
Right,
No,
right,
of course, it doesn't even occur to them to
right.
never try again because they want to go places. They want to do things. They want independence. But when we're adults, we have to, or, even teenagers, we have to keep that mindset of just because I fall down doesn't mean I got to stay there.
Hmm. Yeah,
So, but
absolutely.
that, I mean, with somebody who's has experiencing depression, that is really difficult. And so
Right.
we both help them to, make those tiny baby steps to get to where they feel like they can accomplish things.
Right, right, right. So, so I mean, if you think about it, uh, you know, sometimes you're dealing with individuals who have a lot of difficulty just standing up or
Right.
taking a step. You know,
Mm-hmm.
their proprioceptive cognition, their ability to um, recognize or perceive where their body is at in the world
Mm-hmm.
is just incredibly low. They're very low connection between uh, their hand and their brain, or their foot and their
Mm-hmm.
brain. They don't understand. You know, you'll tell them, put your hand up, and they'll take a step forward. I mean, it's really that insane sometimes, where
Mm-hmm.
you can really so okay, so I'm gonna take a step forward with my left foot, and I'm going to put my left hand forward.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll take a step forward with their right foot and put their left hand forward. It's like that's really, yeah, on something that's that simple. Um, they don't have the ability to, and they don't even fully realize that that's what they're doing,
Right.
right? So I think one of the factors, and I think the way that this, and I always seem to find that people with depressive tendencies have a lower kinesthetic awareness. Um, or so kinesthetic awareness would be like your brain's ability to perceive your body's motion through space.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I'm really interested in that relationship, and I wonder um, maybe there's literature about that, but maybe not. I don't know. If you find anything
I'm not sure.
research based in that area, that I'd be really interested to read about it because that's just something that I've found in 11 years of teaching martial arts now. Um,
Yeah, I'm assuming it would probably be um related to body awareness, so that might be more
right.
closer to the term that would be used in like counseling and psychology research.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, that would be really interesting because I mean I noticed that too with a lot of any kind of mental health issues, um, really especially in our Western society, we're very disconnected from our bodies.
Hmm.
And we're a lot of the times we're working in jobs where we're on our computer all day long and we're not, like a couple hundred years ago when everybody was out working fields and
Hmm.
growing things and farming and moving around or even factory work. Now we're more in offices a lot of times and we're just not connected with our bodies. Everything is convenient. We're on screens all the time. We're racing through our meals. We're not
Hmm.
digesting them properly and like recognizing what's going on in our body while we're eating because everything is so quick.
Hmm.
Um, and so a lot of what I do is helping build clients' body awareness
Hmm.
so they can reconnect with the body and recognize when the body is sending them signals. And I
Hmm.
think that's kind of similar to what you're talking about um, with that body mind body disconnection.
Hmm.
But when we're more connected, we can recognize when we are starting to feel something and figure out what we can do about it, right? Before we get to the depression at a 10, we start recognizing, okay, I'm at a 3, I'm at a 4, I'm a 5. Okay,
Right.
so if I'm at a 5, I need to do something to help myself before I get to a 10 and I can't move, you know?
Right. Right. Yeah.
So how do you work with somebody who has that difficulty with mind-body connection?
S the exact same way that I deal with somebody who has depression and has difficulty with very simple tasks. You have to lower the bar for achievement,
Hmm.
and make those achievements attainable so that they can get an achievement, get a something under their belt. If you can't, um, if you if you're struggling to, let's say, vacuum your room, and you just can't bring yourself to vacuum your room. Well, it's like, let's lower the bar a little bit, get the vacuum out, and just set it there, and that's
Hmm.
an accomplishment. You nailed it. You got that. So sweet. Now that you're um, able to get the vacuum out, maybe let's get the vacuum out and then put it away. Okay,
Hmm.
so now we're able to do manage both of those things. Okay, now let's get the vacuum out and we'll plug it in next time. Right? I mean, sometimes you
Right.
have to break it down that
Or
much.
just pick up
Um,
5 pieces of trash. Pick
yeah,
up
pick
two
up five
pieces
pieces.
of
Yeah,
trash.
if you can't pick up
Right.
five, try one. You know,
Yeah,
try
yeah.
one.
Yeah, just
If you
breaking
can't
it
do the
down
dishes,
into
yeah,
smaller and smaller increments.
right. Yeah, if you can't do the whole
Hmm.
dishes, all the dishes, maybe clean one cup, and be proud of that because that's
Hmm.
better than what you did before. And it's the same thing I think with people that have difficulty with the body awareness, or I'm usually pretty specific. I like to delineate between the difference between uh, proprioception and kinesthetic awareness, because there's some people who have one but not the other. So proprioception
Sure.
being your ability to perceive where your body is at in relation to itself.
Hmm.
And then kinesthetic awareness is something of your ability to perceive the motion of your body through the space of the world.
Hmm.
Um, uh, so um, so yeah, people who have uh, difficulty specifically with knowing where their body is at any given time, uh, you have to lower the bar for them and say, okay, well, if you can't step forward and uh, swing your hand at the same time, right? Then maybe we just work on stepping forward. And and
Hmm.
okay, now what are the parameters for stepping forward? How does that actually break down? Well, the first thing that you have to do is shift your weight from both of your feet to one of your feet, because you're going to pick up one of those feet, and if your weight is still on it when you try to pick it up, it's not going to
Gonna
go
lose your
well,
balance, yeah.
right? So you break down the task to something that's maybe that simple. Can you just shift your weight off of one foot and stand on one foot with the other one only holding your balance, not your weight? Okay, great. Now let's see if we can move that foot forward and put it down. Sometimes you have to get that critical, um,
Hmm.
and it's important to be able to articulate the specificity of those types of things as a martial arts instructor, because it's actually a lot more difficult to describe things in that amount of detail than most people realize. Um,
Hmm.
but there's a
Well, it's
crazy.
things
Yes.
that a lot of times, like if you have pretty good perception, you don't necessarily think about how you're doing it. Your body
Mhm.
just does it. So,
Right.
walking, for example, we know how to walk because we do it every day, and so we
Hmm.
don't always think about what are the muscles I'm using, how am I shifting my weight in
Right.
order to do that. So to teach it to somebody who isn't as keenly aware, it can be difficult. And
Right. Right.
uh,
Well, in the martial arts, we strive to not only um, do the things every day, but to figure out what is the optimal way to do the everyday thing.
mhm,
So I, as a martial artist, think really critically about what is the most effective way for me to walk from here to the kitchen.
mhm,
How 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 might I? What muscles am I using? How might I mean, is a heel toe the best way to go? Is toe heel the best way to go? And in what circumstances are both of those options viable? So maybe if you want to go quietly, you would go toe heel.
mhm,
Or if you want to go faster, you might go heel toe. At what point uh, in your gait do your feet actually hit the ground as you're walking around? Do they hit in front of you or do they hit beneath you?
mhm,
Or do they hit slightly behind you? Well, it depends on how fast you want to go. A lot of people probably don't know that unless they're athletes, right? And they study the athletics of walking or running long distances. So that's an interesting thought also. But when you have that level of control over your body, you have a lot less probability to have any type of body dysphoria,
mhm,
um, in my experience. Um,
mhm,
and obviously, body dysphoria can also lead to a lot of depressive tendencies.
mhm,
Um, so anyway, last thing that I want to talk about, and we're almost out of time, so we might get cut off, but we might have to extend this to be a longer podcast because there's just so much for us to get into.
mhm,
Um, last thing that I want to talk about is the thing that you said about relationships. Um,
mhm,
uh, you know, the literature seems to be overwhelmingly supporting the idea, which is my idea before I even started reading it, but started reading it for this podcast, and pretty much everything supports that one of the major causes of depression is a lack of uh, positive social relationships. So you might have a lack of positive social relationships, or you might have uh, actually negative ones,
mhm,
right? Um, and so I have people joining martial arts all the time who explain to me that they're having these problems. Hey, have don't really have any friends, or the people that I hang out with are just not interested in being better people like I am. And so I'm, you know, um, don't really have a mentor, don't really have a protege. So for me, my opinion is that to have a fairly balanced social group, you have to have friends, mentors, proteges. And I'm going to introduce you to at least friends and mentors on your first day of martial arts training.
mhm,
That would be like your fellow students that are about your level, and hierarchically up the chain of belt ranks. That's one of the other things about having poor social interactions is, or not fitting in, is you don't know what your place is.
mhm,
Maybe you even have a good friendship or you have fairly good friends, but you don't know where you fit into the friendships. And so one of the ways that the martial arts like immediately solves that problem is, well, we're going to put belts on everybody based on the amount of time that they've been training and how good they are. And oh, here, give me one
mhm.
second. Okay, now we're back. We got cut off a little bit, but we can keep going. I'm glad you have time because we were in a super interesting moment there. So what I was talking about was um, people not feeling like they fit in, and even if they have a positive group of friends, um, they maybe don't know exactly how they fit into that group of friends. And so one of the ways that we solve that problem in the martial arts is with the rank system, and the hierarchy. We set up a hierarchy um, where you immediately can look at someone and know how long they've been in the martial arts, how long they've been doing it, relatively what their skill level is. and who they are in the room. You have instructors, it's a very dynamic ecosystem. You have the instructors, you have the assistant instructors, you have the senior students, you have the junior students, and everybody kind of has a different role to play in the ecosystem as far as who picks up the mats and who cleans the mats and who takes care of the studio and who is responsible for education portions and who is responsible for this. And it gets more dynamic the more you start out obviously with no responsibilities except for to learn. And as you grow in the system with each rank, you get uh, slightly more responsibilities. And as you take on more responsibilities, or you become able to take on more responsibilities, you get more. And then up at the black belt levels, it's very, very complex dynamic as far as who's responsible for what. And everybody knows how they fall into a system. I was thinking about this the other day with when we went and played that escape room game,
Hmm.
um, and played with you and a couple of your friends that I wasn't familiar with, a couple of other people that we weren't familiar with, and we played one particular game that was the Starship Enterprise
Space
game.
one. Yeah,
Yeah,
trying to sound.
you're in Starship Enterprise and the ship is crashing and everybody is getting they have a panel readout on their screen and it tells you that the flux capacitor needs to be at 3% or whatever and somebody else controls the flux capacitor or whatever it's called, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to try to communicate to that person, and so it's this massive leadership lesson, especially because of the fact that we were playing the game with people that weren't very familiar with each other. And
Right.
my thought was we would be crushing this with my Hapkido friends. Like with my martial arts friends, we would be crushing this because everybody would know exactly what their role is in the
Who's gonna take the
who's going to
lead?
take the
Who's
lead,
gonna? Yep.
who's going to be who's going to be the second in command if the first guy goes down.
Hmm.
And how do we communicate? What's appropriate ways to communicate with individuals that are above you, across from you, and beneath you, all established in the martial arts and practiced on a regular basis. That's also one of the things that heads towards one of the reasons that uh, you know masters of martial arts or high level black belts of martial arts, um, you know, of traditional martial arts, and especially it's true in Hapkido, I have found are generally highly educated individuals. They generally have advanced degrees,
Hmm.
and they're also generally top of their field type individuals or in charge of their company because of all of the leadership principles that you practice on a regular basis. You just escalate to those levels because you understand how those principles work from years and years and years of it's quite similar to the Boy Scouts do the same thing
Hmm.
or they used to. Um, I don't know. There's been a lot of weird stuff going on with the Boy Scouts recently, but that's same type of idea.
Right. Yeah, and I think that would be a really interesting social experiment to compare, a group of strangers trying to accomplish that task versus a martial arts club or class
Right. Right.
that knows each other and has been working together and with those dynamics because yeah, we failed over and over
Right.
again in that challenge because there was, too many people trying to take the lead and then people in leadership positions that weren't taking the lead and then the communication was all confusing and we even tried to set up a system and the dynamic wasn't working because nobody really knew their role and where they fit.
Right.
So, yeah, it was really interesting.
But yeah. Um, so yeah, anyway,
Mm.
what's go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, coming back to how that fits into depression, with relationships and whatnot, humans are highly relational beings. There's been study after study that shows that we need other humans to survive. And so when we don't have that connection, and that's, that realm of spirituality, I view it as connection. Whether it's connection to a higher power, connection to nature, connection to other humans, but connection to other humans is like a really important one. Um, when we, so like you were saying, even if we have those supports, we have friends, we have family, but we don't feel connected to them, that's pretty much the same as not being connected to them.
Right.
Um, so how would you address that in a martial arts setting, the connection piece?
So there's a lot of ways that we do it. One of the biggest ways is that we play, and we play in a way that includes physical contact.
Mm-hmm.
Um, um, my class is an adult class, so it's 18 and over currently. Um, and one of the things that I think is dramatically missing from adults' lives modern time is both play and physical contact with other people. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's something that I try to make sure is incorporated. So one of the games that we play, oh, and this is fantastic because I have a really particular way that I like to do this. It's not obvious that people know how to play with one another, and it's not obvious that people know how to um, to have physical contact with other individuals. It's very upsetting for a lot of people. And
Mm-hmm.
so one of the ways that you uh, make people comfortable with it is similar with depression. You start with the lowest barrier to entry, and we make sure that we're okay with that first, and then maybe we step it up a little bit and make sure that we're okay with that, and and you start very 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 small. And one of the things that we start out with is well, first we're doing martial arts. We're striking the air, or we're swinging our hands in the air. We're doing the motion alone without contact with another person.
Mm-hmm.
And then we start out with the most basic or fundamental or easiest to achieve form of contact, which is a wrist grab. Somebody grabs you on the wrist, and you have to escape your hand. Get your hand away, make it so that they can't grab you. And at first, you no no stress, no struggle, no grabbing very tightly. Just get the motion, right? They're not grabbing you very tightly, and but then maybe we might play a game where I say, okay, now try, once everybody's comfortable with what they're supposed to do and their role, now it's okay, now try and not let their wrist go. And then you have to play the game of trying to get your wrist away, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have to manage that relationship very in a very complicated way. I really am a huge fan of Piaget and game theory and how kids develop games and stuff, and so I incorporate that into the way that I play games in martial arts. Um, and so particularly related to establishing the rules of the game first, you have to make sure that everybody is fully aware of the rules of the game. Um, and continuing forward, and how critically important that is to development of self is really really interesting to me, and so that's one of the reasons that um, we play games. Um, and oh man, where was I going with that? I just sort of
Well, you were talking about kind of almost like the building the tolerance
right,
for
right, right,
that connection and physical contact because the physical contact is a very vulnerable thing.
right,
And a lot of people have had bad experiences with physical contact.
absolutely,
But it's still a highly necessary part of being human and not just in, like sexual ways, in
right,
many ways. But I did want to add something. So like as a student,
hmm
um, learning this process, the idea of play and games for self-defense
right,
was really important for me because when I was starting off, my focus was very much like I want to be able to defend myself against an attacker. Like
right,
someone's
right,
coming at me, like I got to get out of this. I got to get out of it. But I realized I was struggling with that, and I was tensing up, and I was kind of almost like getting myself panicked
right, right,
when I couldn't do a technique right.
hmm
And so you had had a conversation with me about you just need to have fun, just play for a little while and get more comfortable with it. And that really helped me significantly. Um, and I think that shift in mindset is important because I was able to get more comfortable with it, to build my tolerance. And now I feel like I can do techniques more seriously if I need to, um, because I wasn't so stressed out learning them. And
Right.
I think that's important because we know that when our emotions increase and our stress level increase, it is very difficult to learn.
Mhm.
And so that's one of the things when I'm working with someone with depression or anxiety or any of the other things,
Right.
I look at where is your emotion level. If it's too high, that shuts off the executive functioning um,
Mm.
in the prefrontal cortex, and you can't think, you can't learn. So we have to bring that emotional intensity down in order to be actually able to take in and process information.
Right.
And so I do that a lot with clients too, is teaching them skills to bring the emotional intensity down over and over again so that their baseline, instead of being way up here, is
Right.
down
Right.
farther so that then they have the ability to learn and process and
Mhm.
grow.
So,
Yeah.
and then there's an interesting factor of that too, because as we're talking about the in martial arts, we're not just trying to get people up to being reasonably capable of conducting themselves in society. We're
Hmm.
trying to get people to how can you be the absolute optimum form of yourself? And that's
Hmm.
maybe the development of the warrior. There's this really fantastic meme photograph of a little baby panda bear in a white belt, and
Hmm.
then it's a jujitsu thing, and then the old panda bear is this gnarly looking, mean looking panda bear with scars on his eyes, and he's got tape on his fingers like a lot of jujitsu guys have by the time they get to black belt because they've broken their fingers so many times and stuff. And it's like the okay, so like how do you get from being the baby panda bear at white belt to to being the gnarly grizzled mean looking bear that is the black belt? And the way that you get there is play, and eventually the way that you get to be an incredibly daunting and capable at being aggressive individual um, is something like learning how to play
Hmm.
a little bit rougher over a long, long, long period of time. And now the way that I play also includes getting on top of people at black belt and strangling them out. Right.
Right.
And it
Yeah, that
looks
makes
it's
me think
very
of.
it's actually very violent looking and terrifying to a lot of new people
Mhm.
because they think that we're being incredibly violent with each other, but that's just our play. And when
Right,
your
you know
play
the
level is
limits.
there, yeah, yeah, when
Mhm.
your play level gets to that level, then your ability to defend yourself is locked in because when an individual attacks you physically, it's like, what are you gonna do? My play is harder than this.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that's
that
yeah,
immediately made me think of lions, right?
yeah,
Like when
yeah, yeah,
lions are teaching their cubs how to play, or
right,
cats even. Cats do this all the
right.
time. They teach each other how to play, and they get rougher and rougher and more ferocious, and then you have a fully grown lion who can,
Oh, and
take out a
okay,
large
here's something
animal.
really interesting too, and this is uh confirmed by B.F. Skinner in
Mm-hmm.
the rats experiments. If you've
Hmm.
been to psychology class, you've probably heard all about B.F. Skinner and the rats. Um, but it's so correct and it's so accurate of people as well. It works the
Hmm.
exact same way as what he recognized in those studies, and what he found was that um, when two rats play, it's usually the younger rat or the smaller rat that will request the game. It will go and start picking on the bigger rat because it wants to
Hmm.
play. Um, and the bigger rat will then play with the little rat and they'll wrestle with each other. And what Skinner found was that if the bigger rat won the game more than 70% of the time, the little rat would quit playing with him.
Hmm.
It would quit instigating the play. Um, and that's 100% true of martial arts and jujitsu grappling, especially when you're teaching people submission grappling. Um, it's pretty common in the jiu-jitsu world for everybody to know that the vast majority of people never get their blue belts in jiu-jitsu. And the reason is because if you go into a competitive jiu-jitsu school and you're grappling on the ground, you're getting demolished left, right, and center by people. Uh, the vast majority of people's minds just can't handle the amount of uh, defeat that they have to go through
Hmm.
to get to that level. And so in my class, because I'm informed as to the nature of how the brain works, and also because I'm not trying to develop competitors, right? I'm trying to develop individuals. I know
Hmm.
that if an individual experiences more than 70% failure, right, it breaks something in
They're
your
gonna give
brain.
up.
And
Yeah.
it's really, really likely that you're going to give up. Um,
Hmm.
and so I always balance that when I'm playing with my students. I'm grappling with my students. I have to give you at least 30% uh, success, right? I have to let you turn me over
Hmm.
every once in a while, and um, and then I'll turn you over, and we'll balance that out. It's not obvious yet to me what is the maximum uh, ratio of defeat to success that is necessary to develop people.
Hmm.
Um, but I think 70-30 is a pretty if you can get really close because
Because it also has to be enough of a challenge
right,
for
right.
them to grow.
Yeah,
But
so I think a 70-30 split has been a really good um percentage
hmm.
across, the last 11 years of teaching that um it has to be maximally difficult so that they can be growing maximally,
Hmm.
but not so difficult that it blows off the top and they
Lose
quit,
morale. Yeah.
right? So
You get to the
so
hopelessness or
yeah,
the hopelessness,
yeah,
right?
about a 70-30 split is about the right amount. But anyway, that's an interesting and um more or less uh so the last thing that I want to talk about as far as developing social relationships and playing games is um the um necessity to set the rules of the game, but then
Hmm.
also to abide by those rules.
Right.
And you're actually what Piaget found was that when you're playing games as young kids developmentally, um, you are setting the rules as you're playing the game and enforcing the rules as you're playing the game, right? So maybe you say, hey, the rules are, you know, and you define two or three of the rules, and then you start playing the game, and maybe halfway through the game, somebody says, wait, that's not fair. Interesting. Concept of fair comes in, and then we
Hmm.
have to discuss the rules again, right? And we have to establish our identity within the game. Um, so one of the things that you find in the martial arts is it's a great deal of there's something of a especially in Hapkido, there's something of a relational necessity with your training partner to define how it is we're going to train together.
Hmm.
And this is all was mostly subtextual. Sometimes it's spoken, but a lot of it is subtextual. It's acted out rather than specifically
Right.
spoken. But maybe somebody grabs onto my wrist and they grab me a little bit too hard, and I'm not interested in being grabbed that hard. Can you loosen up your grip a little bit? Oh, okay. Then then maybe we build up and now it is okay to grab harder, right? And I
Hmm.
want to get away. Um, or if you're maybe sparring with somebody, how hard are you hitting each other,
Hmm.
right? Or how hard are you grappling with each other? Um, you have to work that out. If you're grappling really hard and you accidentally catch somebody with an elbow, that's gonna make them unhappy. right? And they might get mad at you or something. And okay, well now
Mhm.
you realize, oh, okay, so I should maybe watch where my elbows go,
Mhm.
right, as I'm grappling. Um, and then simultaneously, everybody has different levels to which they want to train at.
Mhm.
So if I come up and do a technique on you at a certain level, the rule in martial arts, or in my class at least, is if I do a technique on you, I have to be willing to let you do the technique to the same hardness and level on me.
Mhm.
Um, it's a back and forth, and there's an old Japanese saying um, that goes with it. I can't remember the Japanese terminology precisely right now, um, but the term, there's a one word Japanese word that describes that relationship of when I get into a relationship with my training partner, I'm gonna throw you on the ground with the understanding that when you get back up, you're gonna throw me.
Right.
And so you have to manage that as a student. You have to
Don't
learn how to
throw
manage how
harder than
hard
you're
am
willing
I
to be thrown.
yeah, how hard am I willing to be thrown, and how hard are the people around me willing to be thrown, and you have to
Mhm.
become attuned to people's proclivities, because multiple different people in the same class might have multiple different levels of
Right.
desire to train that way. And you have to work all of that out. And so that's one of the things that makes you, I think, more cognizant of the people around you and their feelings when over the course of years and years of doing martial arts training, you
Right.
develop a ability to recognize where people are at in other areas of life, because you have so much practice recognizing and reading what their energy is like in a class, because you have to be very in tune with that in a martial arts class as
Right.
the necessity for it.
Well, I hate to cut this off, but I do
Yeah,
have
yeah,
to run.
absolutely.
But
Super good
great
talk.
conversation. I will see you next week.
Yeah, absolutely. You have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.